In this presentation, we'll be looking at curriculum mapping and its use in a course. I'm Abby Hahne. I'm the Assessment Director and one of the chemistry instructors at Danville Area Community College. The topics we're going to cover are what is curriculum mapping, so I'll give us a quick overview of that. We'll look at why we use it, where we use it here at DACC, and then what types of curriculum maps there are. From that, we can then look at what they tell us about our courses or even your programs, where you would begin, how you would use that in your test writing, and then how you can use curriculum mapping to create what's called a test blueprint, and then what our test blueprints tell us. With curriculum mapping, we're looking at the relationship between outcomes and then a program, a course, or even activities. There are different levels of curriculum mapping, so I'll talk about them, but that's the basic idea, looking at the relationship between our outcomes and what we are doing in class. They can show where we address outcomes in certain courses and programs, the extent to which students meet outcomes. So are they being introduced to this topic? Are they getting their outcomes reinforced in this course, or are they mastering this? We can also list in a curriculum map where assessment occurs. Why do we use curriculum mapping? Well, it can help us identify gaps in our curriculum. When we put this map together, you can actually see blank spots. And so do we need to address that, or is that supposed to be there? So we'll take a look at that. Where our outcomes are not matching what we teach. Sometimes it's easy to teach something that we really love, or we spend a lot of time on a certain thing, but if we look back at our outcomes, we actually don't do that, or maybe we're spending more time on our outcomes than we should. So that hits this last point, overemphasis in an area. So where does curriculum mapping fit when we think about what we're doing at the college? So we have our mission, our vision for what we want to do at DACC. Then we have our outcomes, which if you watch the outcome presentation, you've seen this particular graphic. But curriculum mapping really helps us with our general education outcomes, the program outcomes, and course outcomes. So remember, it's that outcome relationship to your programs, courses, and activities. Curriculum mapping could also be done elsewhere, but we're going to focus a little bit more just on our courses today. What are the different types of curriculum maps? Well, at DACC, we could use our general education outcomes and map them to the programs that we have. We could map our programs and the courses within that particular program. So are we meeting the program outcomes in our different courses? Then we could also look at a course and the different assignments, quizzes, tests, projects, whatever activities you use, and look at how that relates to how much time you spend on a topic versus how many outcomes you have or how important that outcome is. And so looking at gaps or overemphasis. At DACC, we collect the top two officially. So we have worked on general education outcomes to program curriculum mapping and the program to course mapping. And so today I actually want to talk about this last one, course to our assignments, our tests, and projects. What can curriculum mapping tell us in our course? So we can compare any of the following things. Remember, we're always comparing back to our outcomes, but within that, we could take a look at course to program outcomes. So that's one thing that we could hit. We could look at assignments, quizzes, tests, and where the outcomes apply. We could look at how much time we spend on each topic or outcome. We could look at the Bloom's level. We could, like I mentioned earlier, look at where we introduce the topic, where it's reinforced, and where it's mastered in different courses or even within the same course. How many students are passing that particular outcome on that test or quiz or assignment? Where then you collect your assessment data. So what assignment or activity are you using to do assessment in your course? And remember, the big idea is we're helping identify gaps, overemphasis, or looking at where we can relate material to our overall programs. So where might we begin if we wanted to create a curriculum map? Well, you want to start by saying, what information do I want to know about my course? So for instance, do you want to know if you're meeting your course outcomes? Do you want to know if your assignments, quizzes, activities, exams are directly relating to your course outcomes? And another area that you can look at is how you can help your students understand the goals of the course. And so remember, outcomes can give students a very clear idea as to what you expect in your course. And another thing to think about is a curriculum map can be done on an existing course, but you can also create a curriculum map before as a way to design a course. So we have a couple of different uses of that. Another way that we can begin is looking at effective assessments for improving student learning. So that can be another thing that we might want to know about our course. So a good example of a curriculum map is one I actually did on one of my chemistry course outcomes. So here's the outcome, and it's okay if you don't understand the outcome, but I just want to show you what it looks like once I've mapped it out. So my outcome is apply basic concepts and principles of atomic structure and bonding through, and then I have some different statements, outcome statements that the students should be able to accomplish that relate back to that. So I looked at how much time I spend in class. And so I even just went through and added up how many lectures I put together per total number of lectures and just calculated a percent. And so I found that I spend about 20% of my class time on this particular outcome. So I looked at what assignments do I have questions relating to each of this outcome. So you'll notice we introduce a little bit of it early in assignment 3, and then most of it's hit on assignments 8 and 9 in the class. Quizzes 6 and 7 I use, but you'll notice my lab, I only really have one lab that relates back to this outcome. So you might need to ask yourself, if you find this situation, should I have more labs or activities that relate back to this? So this is where I found a gap. But actually looking at the overall course activities and what we do in lab, it's actually okay that I have that particular lab meeting just those few outcomes because I actually go through and have assignment questions. I have test questions. They have quiz questions. So we don't always have to meet outcomes in every activity. Or let me say that like this. An outcome doesn't have to, let me try that again. An activity does not have to meet every single outcome. So you can have an activity that meets a couple outcomes here and then a different quiz or assignment that meets this outcome. So it kind of depends what your course is doing. So you have to think about that. How important is that outcome, and where is it most important for me to assess or test that particular outcome? So from that, you can, from a curriculum map, you can think about writing a test or any kind of assessment you're using in your course. This test, when we use a curriculum map, you can actually start by listing out your outcomes, and then you can look at how much time you spend on that in class, and then your test should relate to that. You shouldn't have 5 questions about something that you only spend 1 minute in class talking about. If you spend an entire class period talking about a topic, then yeah, you probably should have several questions on a test that relate to that. So a curriculum map is helping you think through what test questions I have, how do they relate back to my outcomes, and then, you know, how many do I have? What kinds of questions am I asking? So it actually is a really good way to think through a test or your course. It can also help you think about the Bloom's levels. So if you have different levels of Bloom's verbs, that can relate back to what test questions you have, how many you have, those kinds of things. Now, a well-written outcome can make test writing very easily. So let me give you an example. One of the outcomes that I used in a previous presentation about outcome writing was applying national safety standards to new situations. So I could write a couple of different test questions from that. I could say, describe how to safely work with an unfamiliar cleaner. So that's applying safety standards. The student might have to write out a standard operating procedure, an SOP for sanitizing cooking equipment, which follows appropriate safety standards. I could have students identify safety violations in the following situation. So I could present them with a situation and make them go through and list them out. So you can see I have a lot of different things that I can do with that one outcome, and we can write test questions in a lot of different ways. All right, so how would I then use my curriculum map to create a test blueprint? So test blueprinting is essentially applying a curriculum map to creating our test. So if we think about our outcomes and what questions we want to ask, that's essentially our test blueprinting. It helps us determine if our test is varied in content and our question type, how many questions we're asking based on the amount of time we spend in class, appropriate difficulty level. So if we know what our outcome is and we look at our questions, we could say what Bloom's level is my question, and is that appropriate for the outcome I have? Test blueprinting could be done on an existing test, or you could look at how to design a test from your test blueprint. So you could actually create a test blueprint first, and then that will lead you to writing your test questions. An example of what a test blueprint might look like is shown below. It's a chart, and I've got on the left the course outcomes. Then I have the percent of time I've spent in class. So you could do the number of lectures, you could do a certain number of minutes, or something that's meaningful to you. Then your test item, so which questions correspond to the outcome, what question type, so is it multiple choice, is it matching, is it essay, then your Bloom's level. And then you could also at the end, after you've given that test, list out the number of students that answered that correctly, and that'll show you maybe you need to rewrite your test or that particular question. So you can do a lot of things with this particular test blueprint. So one of the things that you can do once you've completed this chart is you can analyze the results. Some questions that you could ask would be, does the number of test items reflect the percent of time spent on that outcome in class? So do you have too many questions for your outcome or too little, depending on how much time you spend in class? Do you have a variety of test questions? So one thing that you could look at is the percent of each type of question used in the exam. Do you have an appropriate variety? So it depends what class you teach as to what that's going to look like. Does your exam cover all the areas of Bloom's taxonomy? Again, this is going to be dependent upon your course, but it is a good thing to think through. Then at the end, so as I mentioned, after we test, you could go through and look at how many students answered your questions correctly. That maybe will help you understand if you need to rewrite a question, if maybe you need to spend more time in class on a topic. So we can actually take this particular blueprint and get a lot of information from it. When we work through these test blueprints, it could be good to even talk to someone about your test blueprint. So walk through that. You could have someone else look at it and say, does this seem reasonable for what my outcomes are? If you would like more information, I have a couple of different contacts. So myself and Marcy Wright are good contacts at DACC. Then you could also look at the resources on the DACC Assessment website. There are the presentations on curriculum mapping in a program or for a certificate program that Marcy put together. And then here are a few different websites that are helpful for curriculum mapping and that I also actually got some information from for this particular presentation. So let me know if you would like some help in creating curriculum mapping in your course.